Welcome to the Be Well at USask podcast with me, Peter Headley. In each episode, members of the USask and wider community will join me to share ideas and provide guidance on all aspects of being well. And we'll be highlighting campus initiatives and resources designed to engage and support you. In these challenging times, we hope the ideas and information we share will help. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Pam Komonoski, who's the Nurse Practitioner at the Student Wellness Centre. Pam has more than 30 years of healthcare experience. The majority of those years have been spent serving the University of Saskatchewan student community. We're going to be talking about changing health needs of students in the post-secondary environment and the way that has changed the work health professionals who work in that environment do. Pam also shares some strategies for improved health outcomes related to coping with stress and isolation, changing work and life patterns, diet, physical activity, and rest. Well, welcome to the podcast, Pam. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Peter. I'm happy to be present this afternoon with you.
Yeah. So can you start off telling me a little about your background and the work that you and the nursing team at the Wellness Centre do on a typical day?
Okay. And I'm going to tell you what we're doing typically in the past and what we're doing now, which is two very different things.
Yeah, so that sounds good.
Yeah, so I'm Pam Komonoski. I'm the registered nurse practitioner at the Student Wellness Centre, and I'm going into my 32nd year on campus at that workplace. And the role of the nurses has changed over the years. So I'm the full-time nurse practitioner, but we also have Mary Ellen Lebrecq, who works one day a week with us, and we also have a team of registered nurses that work with us as well. And our main mission is to work with the rest of the health team member and helping serve students in managing their health concerns, so that they can be successful in reaching their academic goals. In a typical day at the Student Wellness Centre, it's busy, right? We have lots of traffic. We have lots of students coming in and sorting through all kinds of health concerns. Since March the 25th, when the Student Wellness Centre left the campus, when the campus shut down, we've been delivering a virtual clinic. And this is the first time I can say for all of us as care providers to deliver medical care in this fashion. I don't think any of us would have dreamt in a million years that we would be working in this way. So a typical day for us now is very different. We do a lot of phone calls, we're doing emails, we do some WebEx meetings. And that's been a real challenge for us because typically nursing is hands-on care and in-person care. And, virtually we still have some connection. It's really good to talk to people on the phone and such. But it's a very different way for us to deliver care. And if you asked all of us, honestly, we would say it's not our favorite way to deliver care, but it's the way that we have to do it right now.
So, as you mentioned, you've spent 30 years working at the university supporting students, which is amazing. During that time, what are some of the differences that you've noticed in student health and well-being? And maybe that relates to how the world around students has actually changed.
I was glad that you asked that question to me, Peter, because I thought about that. And I've thought about that in the past because people would assume, right, in 30 years, things change a lot. But it's really interesting. The history of student health is what we were called for the past, I don't know, I can't even remember how many years. But I'm lucky to have a mentor that's still working with the College of Medicine, Dr. Burt McBride, and I was lucky to work with him for most of that time. He's saved history. We have this orange binder that he's passed on to me with information starting back from the 70s about healthcare needs of students. And it's really interesting. I think I've shared it with you, Peter, in the past, but there's more similarities than differences, if you can believe it. When you think about the kinds of issues that students see, that we see are things like sexual health concerns, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, alcohol use and abuse, stress problems, sleep problems. They're common problems people still have. I think that the bigger difference that we see today are just the way that students present through having contact with social media, the internet, information. Everything's at our fingertips. We have instant access. People want instant access, instant treatment, instant information. So that's very different, I think, from what it was. But I think essentially the problems are quite a bit the same for our student population anyway. And that's kind of what makes us, what we believe at Student Wellness, to be experts in some of those areas, because those problems are quite common in our student body.
What would you say to, particularly around the discussion around mental health, what would you say to people who have that view that students are more psychologically fragile now somehow than they were in the past?
That's a good question. We have this debate and this discussion frequently with all kinds of people, and it's really hard to say, is the problem more prevalent now, or are we just better at addressing the problem and identifying the problem and providing help for the problem? I think one could argue that that's more the case these days.
And I think that social media piece, and certainly I've spent quite a bit of my time thinking about this, and I think we're just way more aware of things. So I don't think that the problems of today, exactly as you say, are different from the problems of the past. But the problems of today tend to be magnified and much more visible to us because of the day-to-day social media piece. But also, what are your thoughts about people accessing services in terms of the conversations we have, particularly around removing stigma around actually walking through the door in the first place? How does that feel different now?
That is important. That I think that has definitely improved in time as well. When I think back, when I started, having some of those personal conversations with students about sexual health, mental health, 30 years ago, people weren't keen to come to the doctor or talk to the doctor. The doctor wasn't even comfortable sometimes dealing with those issues, and people were instantly referred to psychiatry. Now, like in my practice as a nurse practitioner, I can diagnose and manage a lot of those mental health illnesses myself. Depression, anxiety are so common, and that's become a very common illness for me to identify and manage and treat. And I think people's comfort levels increases with time and experience. So like student wellness practitioners, I think, are very comfortable with those health problems because they see lots of them. And in turn, I think that makes our students more comfortable to seek us out and address those problems.
And it seems significant that in the last few years, the Student Wellness Centre now has a full-time mental health nurse. Tell me a little about the thinking around the role that Devon has at the Student Wellness Centre.
Thinking back how our plans evolved around that are like the demand, and I think we're not more special than other clinics. Every clinic is busy, right? And mental health is busy in every practice. But, we're fortunate to have a team of nurses, doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, dietitians. And we thought, what we're missing in that piece is a community mental health nurse. And I think when you think about services and adding people or positions, one of our previous managers used to say, if we hire X or Y, it's just like a black hole that you just can never kind of meet the demand. And I think we just thought, it's time to look at just offering another service, a different service, right, to provide more support and to keep people safe and at home and still staying in school and in their community. And that's where Devon's role has been really, really helpful to our team.
And I think Devon and I are going to be talking together in another episode, so I'm looking forward to that. So just focusing again on the current situation, there's been lots of discussion focused on respiratory, physical illness related to the COVID virus, as well as the impact of social isolation upon mental health. But it seems to me there's been limited amount of discussion around general physical well-being. Could you share some thoughts from a clinical perspective about day-to-day strategies for coping with stress or isolation, or even a changing work and life pattern?
Right. When this started and the social isolation started, I think many of us thought it would be 2 weeks, right? Oh, if everybody stays home for 2 weeks, we're going to flatten the curve. It's going to be great. And then it's like, oh, maybe it's 4 weeks, right? Well, here we are. I think it's been longer, I think, than people imagined. And initially, there were so many questions about COVID and people seeking out information. Honestly, for student wellness staff, I can't speak for other clinics in the city, but we get very little question about COVID specifically right now because Saskatoon specifically does very well at keeping their numbers down. So now it's time for people to start thinking about their other health issues. So the things that the nurses would speak to on the phone or dealing with email would be sexual health things. So things like contraception. I'm still doing contraception visits over the phone. People still have sexual health concerns about screening and infections and those kinds of things. It's allergy season, which does get a bit confusing sometimes for people with COVID because, with allergies, if you suffer from them, you're sneezing and coughing, and sometimes people are short of breath or asthma acts up, things like that. because people are isolated, we don't see, we're not seeing a lot of the sore throats and that kinds of things. So that's kind of been a bonus. But people are struggling with routine and with sleep or not sleep. And that's something we, COVID or no COVID, we talk about that quite a lot because students tend to sometimes not follow the best routines. So, and sometimes when I talk to students about this, I think, oh man, this sounds like common sense. And maybe it's because I've said it for so many years, but really people sometimes really struggle to follow, right? So some of the things that I just share with them and really get them to think about, okay, how can we make this work? How can you do this? So for example, in this time of isolation, you say it's really important to stick to a routine. And that might sound a bit boring, but really important, right? So that means going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time. In the morning, when you get up to start your day, get dressed. Don't stay in your pajamas all day, and comb your hair. Do those kinds of things, right? Trying to get some regular exercise. And, a lot of people struggle, but people can be active at home. If you live in an apartment, you can run up and down the stairs. You can do exercises on the floor of your living room. There's a lot of online yoga classes people can do. I've had students tell me they're doing dance classes online. And, if people have, say, two good legs that work walking, you can walk 365 days a year, even when it's miserable out. The other thing about being active is, sitting at our desk, right? Some of us are sitting more than we've ever had, right? And our offices might not be quite as ergonomically correct as they are on campus. So that's one thing I mentioned too, is to make sure that your desk is set up so that you're sitting comfortably, that you can reach things comfortably, doing stretches while you're sitting there, moving your feet, moving your shoulders, those kinds of things. And one thing I have to share is, like, when I talk to students about like diet, people are really honest. Students are really honest with us and saying, they're eating more, they're drinking more. Some of them are smoking more marijuana, right? Just because they can and because they're at home and they're bored and we really try to say to people, all that's okay. Like if we're all honest, some of us are probably doing more than we might normally as well. And, I tell people to don't beat themselves up about it, right? Give them permission. It's okay to do that, but we don't want to make that a habit, right? The other thing.
I was going to say, yeah, in terms of you touched upon something. If we're being honest, one of the things that I've been finding, certainly at nighttime when I should be closing down and going to bed, is that I'm not necessarily doing that. And I know we're living in an age when people say, I'm going to bed, which actually means I'm now going to lie in the dark and look at a device for 2 hours. What is actually going on and perhaps going wrong in my body at that time of night? And are there ways that I or anyone else can ensure that I'm actually have a good routine to get an adequate amount of rest that I need?
I think Peter, that's something a lot of people struggle with, right? Is that exact issue about first of all not kind of winding down before they go to bed, right? One thing we suggest, and there's research that backs this up too, is like no screen time 1 hour before bed. I remember one time giving a talk to, I think, some nursing students when we mentioned that, and the student said, well, what would I do for an hour before I go to bed? So there's a few things you can do, but, one of them could be like reading a book, right? Winding down by having a bath or shower before you go to bed. Because when you're lying there, whether you're on your screen or not, or if you're thinking about the list of things you have to do, it just winds you up more, and your brain just isn't able to rest and kind of wind down, right? So we talked a little bit about this, about this routine of going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time, trying not to nap. And if people do nap, like sometimes people have such insomnia, they get their days and nights really switched around by staying up super late. So then I tease them and say they're kind of working night shift by doing that. But, eventually that comes to an end if people have to get up for commitments in the morning, right? So, it's just not a good habit to really start. And then also too, like, not eating too late at night. People that have their supper meal at 8 or 9 at night, it's kind of too late. Like your body's just working on digesting and that kind of thing. So it's better to have, just a lighter snack before you go to bed than a big meal. Also, some students have really good success with using different apps. So I kind of contradicted myself by saying no screen time. But if you haven't had screen time for an hour and you're laying in bed and you can't sleep, some of the apps that people find good are different ones called Guided Mind, or Breathe is a good one. I think on our webpage, the nurses have a list of them as well. And sometimes just something simple is having some tea. Like, there's different teas you can buy that are more suited to making you sleepy, and that would be something people could do. And just really setting limits on your nighttime Netflix watching or TV watching or whatever people are watching.
Yeah, I think all of those things are really great advice, and for sure, I had a conversation in a previous episode with one of our computer science professors, and her expression was, "Not all screen time is created equal," which is to say there are some valuable things, and we actually talked a little about some of these mental health apps as well. I think it's a lot of the way these things are set up, particularly something like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever people have, that it will literally roll to the next episode. So there's not even a conscious piece, or you may be unconscious by then. Maybe that's why. But I think a lot of it's the way that the technology has been structured in such a way as it does not naturally stop, and so nor do we. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was that about 3 years ago in 2017, you actually won the President's Service Award for your work with students across 30 years. And I'm aware that you didn't have the opportunity to make a speech at the convocation ceremony at which you received the award. If you had been able to share some thoughts, what would you have said?
Peter, I really appreciate you asking me that, because, it's hard to believe that was 3 years ago. And that was such a highlight in my career, and just so humbled by that nomination and winning that award was so awesome. But I've said this so many times, that the team at the Student Wellness Center, you're only as good as your team is, and as grateful and happy as I was to receive that award, it was really a team award. Because if people think I'm, have something to offer to my workplace, it's only because of the people that I work with, and I'm just so eternally grateful for that. And as well, my family, right? Like, I've worked full time my whole life and raised my children, and they're all grown up now, and I've just had my first grandbaby just 3.5 weeks ago, and my husband, like, without your family support, you just do a better job, right, when you've got the support of your family as well. So that I would have to say that for sure.
Well, that I know it meant a lot to us as well. It was so cool to see you get that award and the recognition, and as you say, not just for you, but actually the nature of the work that is done, and work that is often not necessarily seen in when we talk about student success. We don't always think about that sort of health and well-being, but also the life skills. And a lot of what I hear you say is actually about coaching life skills for not always young people, but mainly young people, and thinking about their choices and their direction in life.
Right. You asked also too to think about a kind of a final thought for people to think about what I don't know, I can't remember where I read this. I've been reading so much, but when you think about what's going on in the world now with COVID, it's really an unprecedented time for the whole world, right? And everybody's facing that same storm, but we're all in different boats. So how we all manage it and what we're faced with is very different. So I think it's just really important for all of us to keep that in mind, and also thinking, every day thinking about something to be grateful for, because there always is something to be grateful for every day.
And so you just mentioned that you've had your first grandchild, and many, many congratulations. And I think this might be part of the answer to the question I'm about to ask, but is there a particular thing that you're doing to be well yourself right now, a sense of connection that you have, or something that brings you joy? What's that thing for you, Pam?
Oh, we've waited for this grandbaby for a while. So, staying healthy, right? Like, and because our daughter doesn't live in Saskatoon, they're in Alberta, so staying well so that we can be able to go see them, and being ready to help if they need help. I'm kind of obsessed with walking. We live on an acreage just outside of the city, and now that I'm home, I'm walking even more now than I used to, and having my big dog helps me to stay accountable. But and just being outside, right? Like we're lucky we're living out in the country, and just planting flowers now and starting that garden. Like, those are all things that, for me, help me just to stay grounded and feel good.
That's great. Well, listen, we appreciate you so much at the Student Wellness Centre in the university. I also appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Be Well at USask podcast with me, Peter Headley, and thanks again to Pam for joining me and sharing. Students can connect with Pam and the rest of the Student Wellness Centre team through the contact details and links in the down bar. Please check in again for further episodes and more content related to being well. Please subscribe and share this podcast. You can find us on multiple platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. We'd also love to hear from you, so please post comments and questions, and we'll look to include them in future episodes. Also, if there's someone you'd like to see as a guest or a topic you'd like us to cover, or even a reaction to an episode, please write to us at bewell.podcast@usask.ca. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Matt Walsfeld, who works as the Community Engagement Coordinator in the Office of Sustainability at the university. We're going to be exploring the work that office does. We also talk about our responsibility for safeguarding our environment, as well as why the human race doesn't panic about the climate crisis like we have done about COVID-19. So until next time, stay safe and be well.